The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Live from Boston, Massachusetts, it's Unscheduled with Les Skymo and Dave.
How's it going, Les?
And I want to thank our military for the great job they're doing and the sacrifices them and their families are making. And God bless them, and we're praying for you, Dave. We got a very special guest tonight, and she's a constitutional scholar. She's been teaching the Constitution for 20 years plus. Me and you had a great luncheon with her, Ricky Pepin, and she goes to churches, social groups. She'll go anywhere where she can draw a crowd, and she teaches a class for free. But you got to buy some supplies and things to keep up with things. And Dave, go ahead and read that off.
Yeah, if you'd like her email address, it's ricky@pippin.com, and it's also www.rickypippin.com, RICKIPEPIN.com. So, folks, if you'd like to get in touch with her, that's the way to do it. She'll be on our air shortly.
Yeah, I tell you, Dave, when we went up there and had lunch with her, I was the wealth of information. I mean, she is a genius when it comes to the Constitution. You can tell right off the bat she's the real deal. She knows what she's talking about. She homeschooled her kids, she told us, and so that's how she really got started into this, and it just become a calling. She felt it was a calling of God. She's a Christian woman, and I tell you what I love about what she does, Dave, is she brings you the Constitution from the perspective of the Founding Fathers, what their main intentions was, what they meant when they wrote the Constitution and the Articles of the Constitution, and she's just a wealth of knowledge, and I was just very pleased to be able to meet her, and she enlightened us on some things too. There's a lot of myths out there about our founding fathers and what they believed and what they didn't believe, and that may be her right now. Nope, that's my house phone. Daggone, I'm so anxious I can't tell.
Yeah,
Take that off the hook.
What she says though is, how can you protect Americans' rights and maintain America's laws if you don't know what they are? And another little line she had is, no one is truly free who cannot think and reason for themselves from the right foundation. And it's so true. How many of us don't really know the U.S. Constitution?
Right.
We don't really know.
Right. Well, see, we're conditioned. We've been so conditioned over all these years, Dave, to just comply, go along, comply. And so much of what our laws and our ordinances and all that is unconstitutional today. And, we're taught to be, our current system teaches us to just be totally submissive, to surrender, just surrender to the system is what they want. They want total compliance. They don't want to hear about your constitutional rights. They don't care about your constitutional rights. They don't work for you anymore. So that's why they laugh at you when you tell them, hey, I'll pay your salary. You're a public servant. I have actually had a congressman's, a state representative's aide laugh at me when I told him that. And, man, you talk about burning me up. I'm glad he wasn't in arm's reach. But that's their attitude, Dave.
Now, if you pay taxes, you pay their salary.
Yeah, but see, they don't care. See,
matter of fact, everybody that works for the government works for the people.
they're supposed to be
they
servants.
They don't manufacture their money from nowhere.
Right.
Even state, local, federal, everybody.
We are forced customers.
That's exactly right. We're forced to pay taxes.
Yeah.
How did this country get along so long without paying taxes? Over 100 years without no federal income tax.
Right.
Until the Congress suddenly passes a law and says, well, we could take your money.
Right. Well, and we had the military.
They didn't put it up for a vote. They just did it.
Yeah, they just did it. And they done things. If you'll go back and check the history, Dave, all these evil things that these legislators or federal government done to us, it was at a time when our country was in turmoil, in stress, in war, in depression, in an uproar. That's when they done these things, when people's attention was somewhere else. Now, you go back and you check your history, you'll see that I'm right. Mm-hmm. And, the tyrants have taken over our federal government. And, the sad thing about it, up until President Trump, in your lifetime, you're a couple years older than me, have you ever heard a politician say, I am going to restore the Constitution of the United States?
No.
And I never have either. I've heard him say, well, I uphold the Constitution. I've heard him say, yeah, I'm a constitutionalist, but they ain't lifted one finger, okay, to get the boot of the federal government off the neck of the people. Not one thing have they done to get out of our wallet.
Well, we got a lot of talk about the Supreme Court. Kennedy's retired today. I was going to retire on July 31st.
Oh, yeah.
We hear a lot of talk about the talk of the Constitution being interpreted by the Supreme Court, but it's rarely ever done. They changed the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution did it give you a woman a right to have an abortion.
Right.
It's not there.
Exactly.
So they made it up.
Right.
If it's not there, they just make it up.
Well, it's just like this. Okay, why do we have to buy a permit to carry a gun? What's the Constitution? What's the Second Amendment say? Bear arms. That don't mean have them in your closet at home. If you bear something, you're carrying it.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, people. Here she is.
There we go, folks.
Hello, welcome to Unscheduled with Les Skymo and Dave. And could I have your first name and the state you're calling from?
Lester, this is Ricky.
Oh.
I knew that was you. I just like saying that. Ricky, thank you so much. This is such a pleasure. And we are going to just turn you loose and here in a minute. But I want to thank you for this interview and for meeting me and Dave up there and having a luncheon with us. I was really impressed with your knowledge, and I could tell right away that you was a person that really knew what you was talking about, the love you have for our country, for our Constitution, and for our founding fathers. It impressed me. And I want to ask you this first. Now, do you consider yourself a constitutional expert, a professor, or just a teacher?
I hesitate to take on titles. I mean, my whole life I have been self-taught with the things that my passions drew me towards. I've been teaching the Constitution for 20 years now, and yet every time I teach it, I still learn more stuff. And so I hate to say I'm an expert because I'm still learning too.
Well, it's kind of like the Bible, every time you start reading the Bible, it's living. See, now that brings up another subject. Ricky, people want to call the Constitution a living document in the sense that it changes with time. That's not true, is it?
Absolutely not. One of the things that we do, I work with an organization called the Institute on the Constitution, and help them to write a curriculum for a 12-part course on the Constitution. And it goes back to the very beginning of law. Where did law start? And it was actually with God. God was the one that initiated law. He gave Moses the Ten Commandments, etc. And one of the things that we learn as we study, at the Institute on the Constitution, is we use the method of education that our founding fathers used called the principle approach, where we use the Bible, 7 biblical principles, and Webster's 1828 definitions to define our terms, and we ask leading questions to help people discover the truth for themselves. And one of those truths, to get back to your question, is the fact that the Constitution was based on biblical principles, and how those principles apply will change because technology changes and everything else, but the undergirding principle never changes because those principles come from God's Word.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, you work with the Institute on the Constitution, and you've got over 4,000 graduates. Now, are you the founder of this organization?
Well, no, I'm not. It was started, it's an interesting question because I give you a little bit of my own personal history. I'm a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, published author, international lecturer, but I'm also a Christian and a patriot. And when I started homeschooling my own children several years ago, I discovered revisionist history. And it really made me mad because nobody likes to be lied to. And I was finding that the things that were written in the history books many times were simply not true. And so I started going to educational conferences in various places around the nation. And in 1995, I went to one in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And when I got there, there was all kinds of materials present there. But this one table had a course called the Institute on the Constitution. And Lieutenant Colonel John Eidsmoe was the one who actually wrote the course initially. And I was just drawn to that table, and I told you when we talked that when I was standing in front of that table, I had a God moment because my heart just about started to beat out of my chest. And I knew that God was telling me I needed to not only take that course, but I needed to learn how to teach it to others as well, beyond my own children. And that was the beginning of this incredible journey of first using his materials to teach. But then I added to those materials through the years with this principle approach to education because Dr. Eidsmoe's material were very good, but they taught people all about the Constitution, but they didn't teach people how to use it. And to me, when you learn something, you don't learn it just to learn it. You learn it because you want to do something with it. And so this principle approach helped do that. And I wrote some application questions so people would figure out how this would apply and how it could change their lives or how they could change the government or whatever. And that's when I started having these tremendous numbers of graduates. I couldn't even keep up with the demands for classes anymore. And the people from the Institute on the Constitution, their headquarters is in Pasadena, Maryland, and at the time I was in Ohio. And they called me and they said, "You're graduating more people than anybody else in the whole nation.
Wow.
What are you doing?"
Amazing. That's amazing.
And so I told them, how I had added this principle approach to their curriculum, and they were very interested. They wanted to see it. I sent it to them, and they liked it so much that they flew me back to Maryland to film a teaching DVD that added those applications to the course. So the long answer is that no, I did not write the materials. They were written by Lieutenant Colonel John Eidsmoe. However, they have been edited by me and rewritten by me to include this method so that people can actually learn how to use it.
Now, you say revisionist. Now, you mean you take exactly what they said and from the actual documents and incorporate it into your lesson rather than hearsay or rather than opinion. Is that what you mean by that, Ricky?
Well, what I mean by that is, for example, we, instead of telling people, well, this is the way it is, somebody lied to you, we show them. And you and I went through that with our lunch interesting the other day when you brought up the fact that, as so many people say, that some of the founding fathers were deists, particularly Ben Franklin. And what I do with that is to take them to Benjamin Franklin's writings and his words. And we find in history that when they were having the Constitutional Convention, the initial one to write the Constitution, there was terrible disagreement, and the founders from the different states, from the different colonies at that time, they could not come to an agreement. Nobody was getting anywhere, and we had this brand new nation, and we couldn't even come to an agreement of these great minds as to what the law would be. And what's the definition of a deist? I mean, when we look it up, we find a deist is basically somebody who believes that God wound up the clock of the universe and set it down and walked away and just let it do its thing. And so a deist believes in God, but he doesn't believe in an active God. He just believes in a passive God that just sets things in motion, and what will be, will be. Well, Ben Franklin, when he was at the Constitutional Convention, and they were at an impasse, actually prayed or said to them, and can I read part of his prayer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
He said, when he was addressing it, he said, "Gentlemen, the little progress we have made in the last weeks is a melancholy proof of the imperfections of the human understanding, groping as it were in the dark. How has it happened that we have not sought the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding? In the beginning of the war with Britain, we had daily prayer in this very room and asked for divine protection. Our prayers were heard, and they were graciously answered. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend, or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance?" That's not a deist.
No, it isn't.
Absolutely not. Well, Jesus said
that's a man talking about a God who intervenes in the affairs of men, and he believed very strongly in that. And it was what led to the prayer after that statement was what began the beginning of the agreement for them to actually write the Constitution.
Ricky, the Lord himself spoke these words. He taught us to pray in the Lord's Prayer. He says, "Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen." So he taught us to pray daily this prayer. And this prayer is, and it's important to ask daily for the bread you receive. So definitely, Jesus Christ didn't think that his Father was a deist, because he said to pray daily. You can change the will of God if you pray. I mean, there's case after case where God wanted to do something, and man's prayers, that's changed his mind. So God can change his mind.
We all have destinies to walk out, and I think it's very important for each of us to pray. And that's one of the things, again, we used the original documents when we teach these Constitution classes, and they are full of founders' quotes that are saying just what you said. They had a firm reliance on God and his providential intervention. And today, we're told that, separation of church and state, you can't teach God in schools. I mean, I got invited to teach a Constitution class at a public school during the summer. It was not during regular school time, and the public was invited to come, and any of the students who wanted to come could come to the class. And the ACLU actually got involved and threatened us with a lawsuit because they said we were going to violate the First Amendment rights of these students if we taught them the Constitution from our curriculum. And we were like, "Excuse me? Are you telling me that it's unconstitutional to teach the Constitution?" And their reply was simply that because we use God so much. And our reply was, we're not putting God in there. We're using original primary source documents, and that's what the founders did. You can't teach this document without teaching about God because they taught about God.
Yeah. Ricky, what's your target audience? I mean, how do you, what would you say is your target audience that you teach?
Well, the 12-week course, the IOTC has courses and materials for just about any age, okay? We've got a program that we put together for Liberty Camps for kids that are 6 through 12 years old. But our main course, our flagship, is this Constitution course, and it's basically for high school and above.
Right. Now, you mentioned the separation of church and state, and a lot of what I hear today is people will say, well, you got to get religion out of politics. Don't you think that, would you agree with me that that's the problem with our government today?
Absolutely. I mean, again, our founding fathers, it's not that they were teaching theology, that they were just, but they were putting the truth, the true nature of what our founders intended for God and government to work together was to infuse the moral principles of the Bible that are in there. I mean, when the Pilgrims came here, they wrote in the Mayflower Compact that their purpose for coming to America was to glorify God and advance the Christian faith. Now, think about that. I mean, explorers were coming all over the world at that point in time, and it was men that were commissioned by kings to go to various places around the world and stake the king's claim from the different countries on different pieces of land. And they were enlarging their empires that way. The Pilgrims came over here with their wives and with their children and their purpose. I mean, they came as families. They didn't come as men that were trying to enlarge the empire of a king. They came as families, and they wrote in the Mayflower Compact that their purpose was to advance the kingdom of God, or to advance the Christian faith. I mean, this nation was founded for the very purpose of mixing God and government by infusing Christian principles into the government, not by teaching a particular denomination, not by putting, your priests and your pastors as the head of government, but by infusing those Christian principles into government. And that's what we've forgotten. I mean, George Washington said that, while just government protects all in their religious rights, true religion affords to government its surest support. That's marrying God and politics, government.
Right. And that stupid 1-800 number somebody trying to call me, but I'm going to have to hold them off right now. You still there, Ricky?
I'm still here.
All right. Yeah, I hate not to get this, but that's all right.
Well, you can grab that. Maybe it's a question we need to answer.
Well, if anything happens, come back, okay? Call me back. I'll see if they're still on.
Is that going to cut me off, so I need to dial in again?
I don't think so. Well, they hung up. That's okay.
But you know, Ricky.
Awesome.
That's okay.
And let me share one other quote with you. I just quoted George Washington with you and what he said about the relationship between church and state. But Martin Luther King Jr., there's a modern-day theologian, and listen to what he said about church and state. He said, the church must be reminded that it's not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority.
Exactly. I totally agree with that.
What a statement. And how is the church being the conscience of the state today? Does that happen?
I'll tell you what, they've just backed off.
Well, they're afraid because they've been threatened with lawsuits about this separation of church and state, which is actually a total lie.
Well, and they threatened to take their 501c3s, and I think that was Johnson, wasn't it, Dave, that started that?
Johnson Amendment, that is correct.
Yeah, and they keep politics out of the pulpit and stuff, and that's unconstitutional on its face.
It certainly is. Because, again, when we get back into our founding documents again, you find in the Declaration of Independence, the founders wrote what the foundation of American law was supposed to be. The phrase that they said was the laws of nature and nature's God. And we teach that in class, and then we say, okay, well, there's that phrase, but what does that mean?
Right.
So we our trusty 1828 dictionary, and we find out that the founding fathers were referring to the Ten Commandments and your God-given conscience.
Exactly.
Ricky.
So all law in America.
I'll jump in here for a second, Ricky. If
was intended to be
if you
under
can,
the Ten Commandments and your God-given conscience, the
Right.
biblical law.
yeah,
Right.
if you can hear me, Ricky, the thing I'd like to say is that God's laws never change, and when the
That's
United
exactly right.
when the United States came into being, they based everything on God's law, Judeo-Christian values. So if God never changes, the reason He never changes is because He's perfect. So when you're perfect, there's no need to change, and that's a fact. So why do people want to change the Constitution of the United States now? It's close to perfect as you can get it.
Well, unfortunately, our educational system is steering the hearts and the minds of our young people to lies and just, not giving them the truth of what their heritage is.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, real quick, Ricky. I'm sorry I didn't catch that call. If you would, please call back, and we'll get your question to Ricky here. And so call me back, and like I say, we was kind of in the mainstream there, Ricky, and I hated to break you up there. And but my apologies to the caller. Please call back, and I will answer your call. Now, Ricky, explain this natural law, if you would, please, because we've got these city ordinances, we've got all these different things that we have to obey. I mean, every time we turn around, there's some kind of ordinance or something like that. There's another word I'm trying to think of. I can't think of it, but explain the natural law of which our founding fathers intended things to be like.
Well, once again, the first part is the Ten Commandments. That's pretty obvious what that is. But William Blackstone, he wrote the commentaries on the laws of England. He was Sir William Blackstone, a renowned 18th century English jurist, and the founding fathers relied on his books a lot when they were writing American law. And he wrote about the laws of nature and nature's God. And he said that this law of nature is dictated by God himself, and it is superior in obligation to any other. It is binding over all the globe, in all countries, and at all times. And then he went on to say, this is huge. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this.
Right.
I mean, think about that.
And
Basically, we have written so many laws that are contrary to the laws of nature and nature's God. And according to what our founders believed and William Blackstone, those are not valid laws.
Right. Well, and it's like I said, it's just like your county ordinances, city ordinances. Every level of government has some kind of rules and laws, and you got. There's just fishing license, hunting license, marriage license, gun license.
You know something, Lester. The Lord Himself encountered the same problem as we've got today. Remember when Him and His disciples were going through the field of grain, and they started picking it and eating it, and the Pharisees looked at Him and said, "Don't you know that you're supposed to wash your hands before you do that?" It was a ceremonial washing. Well, what started out as 10 commandments, the Pharisees and Sadducees, they had added to it, and eventually it became 613 laws.
Right.
They made laws that you couldn't travel so many feet from your house because they considered that work. If you went
on the Sabbath.
On the Sabbath, right. You couldn't heal on the Sabbath. You couldn't do anything on the Sabbath. But yet, when Jesus healed in the temple on the Sabbath, he asked them the question, well, wouldn't you get your donkey out of the ditch on the Sabbath?
Yeah.
And they said, well, yeah, sure. Well, that's work. But yet you're saying to me, I can't heal on this Sabbath.
Well, a politician today would tell you, I can, but you can't.
Right, exactly.
There you go.
Ricky, now, how do we get in touch with you? And what kind of things do you offer? Helps? You know, I know you got DVDs and books and things, but you know, you could just tell the audience how to get in contact with you and things.
Well, I would direct them first of all to the American www.theamerican with an N view, all one word, theamericanview.com. And that's the website of the Institute on the Constitution, and they will find all of the different courses that we offer there for adults, for kids, for the sheriff, for the duty of the jury. They can also get in touch with me. I need to find that phone number. Okay. They can. My website is my name, www.rickypepin, RICKIPEPIN.com. My email is also my name, ricky@pepin.com. I like to keep things simple. And lastly, for a phone number, they can reach me through the IOTC, and that number would be 866-730-9796, and then dial extension 9. Would you like me to say that one more time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, it's 866-730-9796, extension 9. And I would be happy to talk to any of these folks. I mean, just to tell you a couple stories, when we teach people how to use this, it really works. People go through a progression when they get into these classes. First, they get angry because they discover that they've been lied to, and then they get into this attitude of, well, somebody ought to do something. And then after another week or two, they start to take ownership and think, well, maybe I ought to do something. And we actually I'd like to share two of my favorite stories.
Oh, yeah, sure. I was going to ask you about them.
Okay. We had two gentlemen, blue-collar workers from West Virginia that were taking this course with a group. And one of them was an excavator and one of them was a truck driver. And they went through that progression, and they just got furious when they found out how much they were being lied to and how much that the government was doing that it had no authority to do. And so these two men, as I said, blue-collar workers with no experience, with no money to speak of, they ran for West Virginia General Assembly. I mean, again, that West Virginia is a very liberal bastion of, whatever. And so for them to run there at all would be against the tide. For them to run there as blue collar with no experience and no money was impossible. But what they did, our course so ignited them that they went out and they bought a pile of pocket constitutions, and they started walking their precinct, and they introduced themselves just with their name and said that they wanted to run for West Virginia General Assembly. They pulled out a pocket constitution, and they handed it to the people, and they said, this is our platform. And do you know, they got elected.
Wow.
Both of them.
Yeah.
I mean, against all odds, they got elected. And it's amazing. And then my other one, I have so many stories, but another one is a young man named Ethan. Ethan was 18 years old. He was a high school senior in 2010. And he got so ignited by our course in the same way that these guys did that he decided to run for city council. And the town, like many little towns, has its string of corruption underneath everything. Well, he ran for city council while he was still a senior in high school, and he was actually elected. Amazing again. Well, the other members were constantly trying to get rid of him because he was reading the city bylaws and the statutes and the Constitution and all of the state laws, and he was beginning to uncover the things that they were doing and unmask it and overturn things and exposing them to the public. And they were always trying to get rid of him, and he'd stand there and say, well, you can't do that. He said, you'd have to follow this protocol or follow this law, and you haven't done it, so I'm not going in anywhere. And he just stayed and stayed. Well, I ran into him about a month ago. I hadn't seen him in more than a few years, actually. And I asked him, I said, well, Ethan, how old are you now? And he says, well, I'm 26. It's been 8 years since I took that class. And I said, well, are you still on the city council? And he said, no, I'm not. And I thought, oh, no, that they finally pushed so hard they got rid of him. And he said, he smiled at me. He said, "No, I'm not on the city council anymore. Now I'm the mayor."
Amazing. That's a beautiful story. When people, when I tell you, when we was sitting there at the luncheon, and you was going through your program and telling us about everything, I mean, it just flowed from you, and you didn't have to haul around, and I could tell that you knew your stuff, and what makes that even better, Ricky, it's a calling from God, and
exactly,
and when you feel when your intentions are to obey God, especially with something like this, I mean, you have that extra zeal to do what God wants you to do. And before I forget, I want to thank you and your husband for your service, being retired Air Force, and just thank you for that. 4th of July next week. My show is actually on 4th of July next week, and so this will dovetail great with that. And I didn't even realize that, and a friend of mine told me. And but I'll send all this to you, the radio program, when my producer sends it to me. And I sent you a friend request on your new Facebook and everything, and I'll send you all this stuff, the radio program. But now, Ricky, there's a lot of myths about our Constitution and about our founding fathers, and which one was Benjamin Franklin. And is there any more that on top of your head there, off the top of your head?
There's several, and again, we refute those not by arguing, but by taking people to the source. And one of them is, this is a biggie, is we get told every time the Supreme Court makes a ruling, when they ruled in Roe versus Wade that abortion was okay, every newspaper and media outlet, including Christian ones, were just decrying, Roe v. Wade abortion is now the law of the land because the court decided. When Burgess v. Hodges was passed, which said same-sex marriage is okay, when the court said same-sex marriage was okay, once again, everybody, the newspapers are hailing, it's now the law of the land. You can't go against that. Well, we take people to Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, which basically says all legislative authority rests with the Congress. And so after the students read that, I say, how much legislative authority? And they look at that little word ALL, all legislative authority. Okay, well, does it say except if the Supreme Court makes a really important decision? Well, no, it doesn't say that. Well, does it say unless the president issues a very important executive order? Well, no, it doesn't say that. Well, then how can Supreme Court decisions be law if all legislative authority rests with Congress?
Exactly.
That's a big lie. They can't.
Well, and that's exactly what they done, Dave, is they made law.
They've lied, and people believe the lie. There's a saying that perception is more powerful than truth, and unfortunately, sometimes that's true because you have to break that perception before you can get through to people. Because people, when we tell them that, when they discover that, that's another place where people just jump out of their chairs. Well, how do they get away with that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they get away with it because of our ignorance.
They get away with it because every time that gay marriage was ever proposed in any state, it was always voted down. So what the left does is they use the courts to get their legislation passed. They legislate from the bench, and that's wrong. And there is no constitutional guarantee for homosexuals to get married or for a woman to have an abortion.
Another example that we use to help people wrap around that truth was we talk about, I shared this with you guys at lunch, about the Stella Liebeck story.
Right.
And I ask people, do you guys know who Stella Liebeck is? And of course everybody says they don't, and then as soon as I say one more line, everybody knows who she is. And Stella Liebeck drove through McDonald's several years ago and spilled hot coffee on herself, and everybody goes, oh yeah, I know who that is.
I did the same thing.
She got some pretty serious burns, and she took them to court, and she was awarded something like $2.1 million or something from McDonald's. The court decided that she got $2 million from McDonald's because of that. That was the court's decision. Now, does that mean, based on what people tell us today, that anybody who drives through McDonald's now and spills hot coffee on themselves is entitled to $2.1 million?
No.
Of course it doesn't mean that.
Right.
And then the final question is then, who did the court decision between Stella Liebeck and McDonald's relate to?
Right.
And the answer is Stella Liebeck and McDonald's.
Right.
The court makes their decisions between the two parties that are involved in the case. It does not become the law of the land. It is their decision, and frankly, it's only their opinion. Mm-hmm. And once again, if we go back to primary source documents, if we go back to the laws of nature and nature's God and visit the same-sex marriage decision, we look at, we take our class through, what's the purpose of marriage? What's the definition of marriage according to God? Okay? And in Genesis, it says it's between who?
A man and a woman.
A man and a woman.
Man and a woman.
And what does he say the purpose of marriage is? He says it's to take dominion over the earth and to fill it, multiply it, and fill the earth.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, can two men do that?
No. It's not natural.
Two women do that.
It's not natural.
Right.
You just hit it on
It's
the nose.
not natural.
It violates the laws of nature and nature's God. And therefore, remember what Blackstone said? That if any law is contradictory to the laws of nature and nature's God, it
Exactly.
is not a valid law.
It's not a law
It's
at
not
all.
because it's my opinion. It's not because I hate homosexuals, which I don't. They're people created in God's image as well.
Right.
Law isn't law because of my opinion or your opinion. Law is law because it has to conform to the laws of nature and nature's God.
Ricky, let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court for a second. There's a lot in the news today about it, and the left, they're all upset about what has happened with the decision to overturn the Hawaii court and California or Oregon court, whatever, to ban certain countries from entering, the people from these certain countries. I think there were 5 countries.
Calling it a Muslim ban.
Calling it a Muslim ban, and where actually the court decided that it's constitutional, that the president has authority to do this, to ban anyone he sees as a danger to the citizens of this country. So they're all up in arms about it, but actually that's what the court's for, isn't it?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is a fantastic example of the way the Constitution is supposed to work. Congress passed that law, and if you read the language of the law, I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, unfortunately, but if you read the language of that legislation, they said that the president has the authority to decide which countries he wants to keep, to impose that travel ban, and he doesn't even have to give a reason why. He has the authority to do that. And so the true purpose of an executive order, once again, when you get into the Constitution, it's not about the president making his shopping list of the legislation of the things that he wants to see. An executive order's purpose is to execute the laws that Congress passed. And so when Congress passed that law, his duty as a president is to execute that law, which is exactly what he was doing. And one of the things so it was totally constitutional. On the other hand, when one judge or 2 judges or whatever, these rogue judges at a lesser level, if you will, at the state level or whatever else, throw out this, well, no, I'm going to, stand in the way. They can't implement this because I say this is unconstitutional. He can't do that. They don't have the authority to do that.
Exactly. They don't.
And yet the whole country bowed to it.
Exactly.
And thank God when this ruling just came out recently, Justice Thomas actually said that very thing. I said, hey, he was listening to me.
He's right on.
He said these judges, a single judge doesn't have the authority to overrule what Congress and the president have done according to the Constitution. I mean, think what havoc that would wreak in the nation if anybody could just toss in a monkey wrench into the legal authority of these people and decide that they didn't like it. It makes no sense.
We got a question here from Chris Mink. He says, who do you think will be the next Supreme Court justice?
Oh, God. Oh, I have no idea.
I'll tell you who I like.
I do believe that Trump's got some good advisors, and I think that he'll put in a constitutionalist. What we have to do is to exert enough pressure on Congress that they accept that they'll put him in there.
Ricky, how do you think about this guy? How do you think about Mike Lee, the senator from Utah?
I'm sorry, what about him?
You think he'd make a good Supreme Court justice, Mike Lee from Utah?
From what I've read of him, yes, because I've read a couple of his books, and he seems to be a very strong constitutionalist. That's our measuring stick. Since you brought that up too, when we teach these courses, we're not teaching about Republicans or Democrats or independents. Our yardstick is always the Constitution. And with Mike Lee, and that's another thing. People say, "Oh, he's a conservative." Well, what does that mean? That means so many.
He's a constitutionalist.
So many different people, and so I'd like to see our language turned around to where we're not seeking to put conservatives into office. We're seeking to put constitutionalists into office.
That's right.
That was going to be my next statement, Ricky. You hear the politicians; they throw that around. It's just like they'll say, "Well, I'm a businessman," and they'll tout their business experience, but they've been in Congress for 10 or 15 years.
Right.
A constitutionalist and a conservative are not necessarily the same thing, and people need to understand this, Ricky, because now, I'm still so ignorant about a lot of things. However, I do understand the difference between a conservative and a constitutionalist, and we need to educate ourselves. People, we're conditioned. The politicians, they have us conditioned, Ricky. But now there's some of us like me and you and Dave, over, several years, we're starting to break out of that. We're starting to learn, that we've been lied to. And that's exactly what you do, is you enlighten people through your classes, and the light goes off in their head, and they're like, hey, my school lied to me, my teachers lied. Our teachers was just as ignorant as we was.
They came through the same educational system.
Exactly. And, if you look at our government now, the system of government we have now, it's allowed for teachers' unions. They use our kids for pawns. You've got unions in all levels of government. It's not the way it's supposed to be.
And when you define your terms and just read those primary source documents, it really cuts through all of that.
Yeah.
For example, how many things have happened anymore under the name of separation of church and state? A school can't put on a play that's got Jesus in it, or Christmas carols, because it says Christ. They can't put on an Easter pageant because that's religious. A teacher can't read from the Bible. Students can't have Bibles in school.
Right.
You can't put the Ten Commandments on the county property. You can't have a cross at a veteran cemetery. Well, where did they come up with that? They're relying on the First Amendment. So I take my students again. Let's look at what the First Amendment says. And I'm going to read from part of it. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, there's more, but we're just going to stop there. And then I asked them, first of all, who is that amendment addressed to?
Mm-hmm.
What's the first word?
Right, Congress. Right.
And what can they do or what can't they do? Well, they can't make a law to establish a religion, and they can't make a law to prohibit the free exercise thereof. And then I asked them, well, what does it say that schools can do? And they look at it, and they're getting all confused and upset, and I finally tell them, well, you know what, if you can't find it in there, that's okay, because it's not in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's addressed to Congress, and it's about making a law about religion by Congress. A student cannot violate the First Amendment. A teacher cannot violate the First Amendment. Public parks cannot violate the First Amendment. The only one that can violate the First Amendment is Congress.
Right.
And the only way that Congress can do it is if they establish a religion or prohibit somebody from exercising their
If they
religion.
try to pass a law.
You know, I tell them, the first 5 words of that amendment say it all. Congress shall make no law.
Right,
If you start bringing anybody else into the equation, that's not who it's written to.
Exactly. Now, we probably got about 12 minutes left here, 10 minutes, somewhere in there. And what I want to ask you, Ricky, before it slips my mind. Now, I define our government like this, today's government, and I call it the king. The king has seized everything. But now, this is my way of looking at it today, is that our government has seized everything, that we have a corporation and we only have remnants of our Constitution left. They've just left us remnants of the Constitution, this government. Would you say that this is the government that our founding fathers intended us to have?
No.
Oh my goodness. It's not even close.
Way
But
off
the
the
good
rails.
news is, once again, if you go back to those founding documents, when in the Declaration, when they were writing those 27 grievances, the founders said in grievance 13 and 19 that any legislation that doesn't meet that criteria of the laws of nature and nature as God is referred to as pretended legislation. So any and all of these outrageous laws, quote unquote, that have been passed that are outside of those parameters, the founding fathers would have immediately said, that's pretended legislation. That's not valid. That's an unlaw.
Right.
And so, you know, we've got this foundation to build on, to go back to. And I have to say that 10, 15 years ago when I started teaching these classes, nobody was talking about the Constitution. They were just talking about all of these laws and all the things that were happening. About 5 to 10 years ago, the Constitution came back into the conversation, but most of the time it was out of context. Today, more and more, it's being brought into the conversation, and more it's starting to be brought back into context. So I have tremendous hope for this country to be able to come back to where it's supposed to. Truth is a spirit.
Yes.
It's Jesus. And you cannot kill a spirit.
That's right.
And so all we have to do is just keep doing what we're supposed to do. John Quincy Adams said, duty is ours, results are God's.
Amen.
Moses brought you the law, but Jesus Christ brought you grace and truth.
Yes. Well, Ricky, we sure appreciate your interview and calling in and like I said, the lunch. And like I asked you if it was okay if we check in on you a year or two if I'm still in this business, and you said sure.
Absolutely.
And I'm gonna do that. And but now you're an author also. Would you want to tell us real quick about your books and how to get your books?
Yeah, the first one, and people can find these on my website, rickypepin.com, down at the bottom of the homepage. The first one is called God's Health Plan, and it was just written out of a very personal experience. I have a son and a daughter, but my son was chronically ill for 19 years, and the doctors could never find out what was wrong with him, and it just got so bad there was no place else to turn. And lo and behold, I found that you could apply the same principle approach of education that we use in the Constitution to any subject, including health. And so I started doing research and started writing down all that I was learning, got asked to lecture all over the place, and people said, have you written this down anywhere? And ultimately it turned into a book.
Wow.
It's got all kinds of websites and recommendations, me telling people what to do, but me giving people information so that they can search out their own health challenges.
Right.
And then the second book that I wrote was called The Power of Hope. And that is all about discovering what Jesus taught about the kingdom of God and what you're finding your calling on this earth and how to walk it out with the power and authority. God called us to be sons God, not cowering in a corner, but he called us warriors. He talked about weapons of warfare, and he talked about us being a joint heir with Christ and having the power and authority that he has. And this book will help you to find that and walk it out. And then the last thing, of course, was I helped to rewrite the curriculum for these various courses at the Institute on the Constitution.
All right. And we can go to your website and find your books, your materials.
You can find all of that on my website.
And how to get in touch with you, how to sign up with you for classes and all this.
And or how to order the books, or how to reach me with email or phone, whatever they want to do.
Yeah. Dave, you got anything? We got a couple minutes. You got anything?
Well, it was a very interesting conversation, and it's great to know that there are people out there that still believe in the basics of what made this country great, and that is the Constitution of the United States of America, that there could be no better foundation than what we have. And those people want to change it and add to it. They're just plain crazy, because this is the way our founding fathers envisioned for us to be free and not be bound by the government. The government is trying to control us, and it should be the other way around. We should be controlling our own government, but we've delegated that to other people, and that's why we're in the mess we're in.
One world order.
Exactly.
But Ricky, thank you so much. God bless you, sister, and you just keep obeying the Lord. And
well, thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk to your listeners.
Well, and I tell you what, I hope you get some positive response from this. We've had a pretty good Facebook audience, and I will share this, and I'm in several groups, and we've got our 1 minute poke there, and I will share this around to several thousand people, Ricky. And
well, I appreciate that. And I really don't go to my Facebook page. That's one thing I just never taken the time to do. So the other places, the places to reach me are through my website and by email.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, Ricky, and we'll be talking to you down the road here. Thank you so much, and God bless you and your family.
Well, thank you, and bless you too.
Thank you, Ricky.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Dave, that was awesome, wasn't it?
That was a good one.
We got a few minutes here, just a few seconds left. I thank the Lord for this interview, Dave. This woman knows what she's talking about. We got 15 seconds.
Well, just enough time to stop. Everybody will see you next week.
All right, same back channel, same back time.
We'll solve everything. And the band played on.